September 1965, the Blue Moon Club, Memphis, Tennessee. Johnny Cash was in the middle of performing I Walk the Line for an intimate crowd of about 200 people when something unusual happened. The audience, which had been completely focused on Cash's performance, suddenly shifted their attention toward the back of the room. People started whispering, pointing, turning in their seats. Cash stopped playing mid-verse, confused about what was causing the disruption. Then he saw him standing in the shadows near the back exit, trying to be inconspicuous and failing completely, was Dean Martin. What happened next became one of the most talked about moments in Memphis music history, a story that those 200 people would tell for the rest of their lives, even though the moment was never recorded, never photographed, and remained almost unknown outside that small club. It was September 18th, 1965, a Saturday night in Memphis. The Blue Moon Club was a small venue on Beale Street, the kind of place where serious music lovers came to hear artists in an intimate setting. It held maybe 200 people if you packed them in tight, and tonight it was full. Johnny Cash was performing a rare small venue show, a return to his roots before heading back out on a major tour. Cash had specifically chosen the Blue Moon because it reminded him of the early days before the big stadiums and television appearances. Here he could see every face in the crowd. He could hear individual voices singing along. It was pure, unfiltered connection between performer and audience. The show was going beautifully. Cash was in top form, his deep voice filling the small space, his band tight and responsive behind him. Meanwhile, at the Peabody Hotel downtown, Dean Martin was having a restless evening. He'd finished filming earlier that week for his latest picture and had a few days off before his next commitment back in Los Angeles. He was in Memphis because the studio had needed some location shots, something about authenticity, about capturing real Southern atmosphere that couldn't be faked on a Hollywood backlot. Now the work was done, and Dean found himself with time to kill in a city that wasn't home, but felt somehow familiar. He was tired of being cooped up in the hotel suite, tired of the entourage that followed him everywhere, tired of the careful management of every public appearance. The Dean that people saw on television, smooth and effortless, perpetually relaxed with a drink in hand, that was a performance. Tonight, Dean wanted to feel like a regular person for a few hours, to go out and experience music the way he had when he was younger, before the fame, before the Rat Pack, before every moment became a photo opportunity. Dean's friend Charlie mentioned that Johnny Cash was playing at the Blue Moon that night. Charlie had picked up a flyer at a record store that afternoon and thought Dean might be interested. Dean's eyes lit up. He'd known Johnny for years, respected him enormously, but their paths didn't cross as often as Dean would have liked. Both were busy with demanding schedules, and their music had taken them in slightly different directions, but there was a mutual respect there, a recognition of each other's talent and authenticity. Dean had always admired the way Cash stayed true to himself, the way he never compromised his sound or his message for commercial success. In an industry full of people trying to be something they weren't, Cash was refreshingly genuine. "I want to go," Dean said suddenly. Charlie looked skeptical. "Dean, you can't just show up at a small club like that. You'll cause a riot. Cash's show will get completely disrupted. Think about what happened last time you tried to go somewhere unannounced." Dean shook his head. "I'll be discreet. I'll go in the back. Stand in the shadows. Just listen. Nobody has to know I'm there. I just want to hear him sing." Charlie. No cameras, no interviews, no performance, just music. Charlie knew this was unlikely to work, but he also knew that when Dean got an idea in his head, there was no talking him out of it. So, they came up with a plan. Dean would dress casually, no flashy clothes, just slacks and a dark jacket. They'd arrive late, after the show had started. They'd use the back entrance. Dean would stay in the shadows near the exit, where he could leave quickly if necessary. At around 9:30, Dean and Charlie pulled up in an unmarked car behind the Blue Moon Club. They could hear Cash's voice coming through the walls, performing Folsom Prison Blues. Dean smiled. That song always got him. There was something in Cash's delivery, that lived-in quality that made every word feel true, like he'd actually been there, actually felt that pain. The bass line thumped through the brick wall, steady as a heartbeat. Dean took a breath. This was what he'd been missing, raw music in a small space. No orchestra, no elaborate production, just a voice and a story and an audience willing to listen. They slipped in through the back door. The club was dark, except for the stage lights focused on Cash. Dean's eyes needed a moment to adjust. The smell hit him first, cigarette smoke and beer, and the particular mustiness of old wood and worn carpet. The floor was sticky under his shoes. This wasn't the Copa room or the Sands. This was real. Dean positioned himself near the back exit, partially hidden by a support column. Charlie stood nearby, ready to run interference if anyone recognized Dean. For about 10 minutes, it worked. Dean stood in the shadows, completely absorbed in Cash's performance. He watched the way Cash commanded the stage with minimal movement, the way his voice carried such authority and vulnerability at the same time. He saw the audience hanging on every word, and he felt a pang of nostalgia for this kind of intimate performance. Dean had played rooms like this once, before the movies, before Vegas, when he was still Dino Crocetti trying to make it as a singer. Back then, connecting with an audience meant looking them in the eye, reading their reactions, adjusting in real time. You couldn't hide behind production values or elaborate staging. It was just you and them, and the truth of the moment. Watching Cash work, Dean remembered what that felt like. The purity of it. The risk. Cash was singing about hard times and hard choices, and every person in that room believed every word because Cash made them believe. Then Cash started I Walk the Line. It was one of his signature songs, and the crowd was immediately engaged. Dean was nodding along, his foot tapping to the rhythm. He could see couples in the audience holding hands, could see older folks mouthing the words they knew by heart. This song had been on the radio for nearly a decade, but it still hit just as hard as the first time you heard it. Cash's voice was unwavering, that steady promise of faithfulness cutting through everything else. Then something shifted in the room. Dean wasn't sure what caused it at first. Maybe someone leaving the bathroom had noticed him. Maybe a server walking past had done a double take. Whatever it was, a ripple of recognition started spreading through the crowd. It moved like a wave, person to person, row to row. Someone grabbed their companion's arm and pointed. Another person turned around completely in their seat. People in the back rows started whispering to each other, then turning to look. Then the people in front of them noticed the commotion and turned too. Within 30 seconds, a significant portion of the audience was no longer watching Johnny Cash. They were staring at the back of the room where Dean Martin was standing, trying desperately to blend into the shadows and failing miserably. Dean saw it happening and felt his heart sink. He'd wanted to be invisible, just another face in the crowd, but that was never going to work. Not here, not anywhere. Johnny Cash noticed the shift immediately. He was a professional who'd performed thousands of shows, and he could read an audience's energy like a book. Something was wrong. People were distracted, looking away from the stage, and that never happened during I Walk the Line. This was the song people came to hear. He stopped playing mid-verse of I Walk the Line, and the band stumbled to a halt behind him. The sudden silence was startling. "What's going on back there?" Cash asked, squinting into the darkness beyond the stage lights. His voice had that edge to it, not angry, but firm. He needed to know what was pulling his audience's attention away. More heads turned, more whispers. The room was buzzing now with barely contained excitement. Cash stepped forward to the edge of the stage, using his hand to shield his eyes from the light so he could see into the crowd better. He scanned the back of the room, trying to figure out what everyone was looking at. That's when he saw him, even in the shadows, even trying to hide. Dean Martin was unmistakable. The profile, the distinctive hair, the way he carried himself, that particular combination of confidence and studied casualness that nobody else had. Cash blinked, not quite believing it. Dean Martin, here, in Memphis, at his show. Then a slow smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that said he was about to do something interesting. What Johnny Cash said next would be repeated by everyone in that room for the rest of their lives. He pointed toward the back of the club and said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "Ladies and gentlemen, the King of Cool just walked into my show." The crowd erupted. People stood up, craning to see Dean. Some started applauding. Others were calling out to him. The intimate atmosphere of the small club had suddenly become electric with a different kind of energy. Dean, caught in the spotlight of attention, raised a hand in acknowledgement, but stayed where he was. He looked almost embarrassed, like a kid who'd been caught sneaking cookies. Cash was still smiling, but now he was gesturing for the crowd to settle down. "Now hold on. Hold on," Cash said. "We can't have the King of Cool standing in the back like he's trying to sneak out of church early." The crowd laughed. Dean shook his head, pointing at Cash as if to say, "This is your show, keep going." But Cash wasn't having it. "Dean Martin, you get yourself up on this stage right now, or I'm coming back there to get you." The crowd cheered. Dean hesitated. This wasn't what he'd wanted. He'd come to listen, not to disrupt Cash's show. But the crowd was already chanting, "Dean, Dean, Dean," and Cash was standing there with his arms crossed, waiting. Dean made his way through the crowd toward the stage. People reached out to touch him as he passed, calling his name, asking for autographs. Dean smiled and nodded, but kept moving, clearly uncomfortable with disrupting the show. When he reached the stage, Cash extended his hand and pulled him up. The two men stood face to face for a moment, and then Cash pulled Dean into a quick hug. "What are you doing here, man?" Cash asked, his microphone picking up the question. Dean laughed. "I just wanted to hear you sing, Johnny. I didn't mean to interrupt." Cash shook his head. "You didn't interrupt anything. You just made this the most interesting Saturday night these folks are going to have all year." The crowd was going crazy now. Here were two of the biggest names in music standing on a tiny stage in a small Memphis club talking like old friends. Cash turned to his band. "Boys, I think we need to adjust the set list. You know that's Amore?" The band members grinned and nodded. Of course they knew it. It was one of Dean's biggest hits, a song that had defined his career in the 50s. Dean looked shocked. "Johnny, you don't have to." Cash cut him off. "I want to. Been wanting to sing this with you for years. Never thought I'd get the chance in a place like this." He handed Dean a microphone. "You remember the words to your own song?" Dean laughed and took the microphone. "I think I can manage." What happened next was magical. Cash and Dean launched into That's Amore, and the small club was transformed. Here were two giants of American music playing together in an intimate space, feeding off each other's energy. Cash's deep voice and Dean's smooth tenor blended in a way nobody had heard before. The band was grinning ear to ear, clearly thrilled to be part of this spontaneous moment. The audience was mesmerized. People later said it was like watching two master craftsmen at work, each bringing something unique but complementary to the performance. Dean was moving more than Cash, his natural stage presence taking over. That effortless physicality that made even standing still look choreographed. When he sang "When the Moon Hits Your Eye Like a Big Pizza Pie," he gestured with his free hand, and the whole room felt warmer somehow, lighter. Cash was more grounded, solid as a rock, providing the foundation for Dean to soar over. His bass line kept everything anchored while Dean's voice floated above it, playful and romantic and perfectly controlled. You could see the joy on both their faces. This wasn't work. This was what they both loved about music before it became a business, before the contracts and the managers and the endless demands. This was two guys who could sing, singing together because it felt good. When the song ended, the crowd went absolutely wild. People were on their feet screaming, applauding, crying. Cash and Dean stood there, both breathing hard, both grinning like kids who just got away with something. "That was fun," said Cash. "We should do that more often." Dean nodded. "Anytime, Johnny. Anytime." Then Cash did something that surprised everyone. "You know what? This is your town as much as mine, Dean. Memphis gave us both our starts in different ways. You want to finish the show?" Dean immediately shook his head. "No way. This is your night. I'm just happy I got to be here." Cash studied Dean for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but you're staying up here. I'm not doing the rest of this show without you." For the next hour, Johnny Cash performed the rest of his set with Dean Martin sitting on a stool at the back of the stage. Dean didn't sing on every song, but he was there, present, occasionally adding harmony, sometimes just listening, and the dynamic it created was incredible. Cash performed at the height of his powers, perhaps energized by having someone he respected so much watching him work. Dean, free from the pressure of being the main attraction, could just appreciate the music. They did a few more songs together. Volare, a song Dean had made famous, with his smooth Italian-American style. Everybody Loves Somebody, the ballad that had given Dean one of his biggest hits just a year earlier. And finally, I Walk the Line Again, the song Cash had been performing when Dean arrived. This time, Dean sang harmony, and the song took on a whole new dimension. At one point during the show, Cash told a story about the early days of rock and roll and country music when everyone was trying to figure out who they were as artists. "We were all scared," Cash said. "Didn't know if we had what it took. Didn't know if anyone would care about our music, but we had each other, all of us trying to make something new, something real." Dean added, "Johnny was always the most authentic one of all of us. He never tried to be anything he wasn't. I always respected that." The mutual admiration between them was obvious and genuine. These weren't two competitors trying to one-up each other. These were two artists who understood each other, who recognized the lonely space at the top and appreciated having someone else who understood what it was like. When the show finally ended, Cash and Dean stood together at the front of the stage, arms around each other's shoulders, taking in the standing ovation. Then, as quickly as he'd appeared, Dean slipped backstage and out the back door. He signed a few autographs for people who'd followed him out, posed for a couple of photos, and then he was gone. Backstage after the show, in the tiny dressing room that was barely big enough for two people, Dean and Johnny sat together for a while. The door was closed, security keeping everyone else out. They didn't talk much at first, just sat in the quiet, coming down from the adrenaline of the performance, processing what had happened. Finally, Johnny spoke. "I almost didn't call you out, you know. I almost let you stay back there." Dean looked surprised. "Why didn't you?" Johnny was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because I saw what you were doing. You were trying to hide, trying to be invisible. And I thought, here's Dean Martin, one of the biggest stars in the world, and he can't even enjoy music anymore without hiding in the shadows. That's not right. That's not how it should be." Dean nodded slowly, understanding. "You're right. I spend so much time being Dean Martin, the character, the image, that I forget sometimes there's a person underneath who just wants to hear good music." Johnny smiled. "That's what tonight was about, man. Reminding both of us that we're still just musicians, still just guys who love to sing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer. Then Johnny said, "You know they'll be talking about this forever, right? The night Dean Martin crashed my show in Memphis." Dean laughed. "Better than some of the things they talk about. At least this one's true." The remarkable thing about this story is how little documentation exists of it. This was 1965. Before cell phones and social media, the club didn't have professional recording equipment set up. A few people had cameras, but in the dim lighting of the club, most of the photos didn't turn out well. There's no video, no audio recording, no professional documentation of what happened that night. What exists are memories. 200 people who were there that night, who saw Dean Martin and Johnny Cash perform together in an intimate club, who witnessed a moment of pure spontaneous musical joy. Over the years, those people told their children and grandchildren about the night they saw the impossible, two legends performing together in a tiny club for no reason other than the love of music. Johnny Cash spoke about that night in several interviews over the years. He always smiled when he talked about it, got that faraway look in his eyes, like he was back in that small club again. Dean just showed up, Cash would say. Didn't call ahead, didn't make a big production of it. Just wanted to hear some music. That's who he really was, you know. Not the image, not the movies, not the Vegas shows. Just a guy who loved music and wanted to be around it. He understood something that a lot of people in this business forget. The music comes first. Everything else is just decoration. Dean was more private about the night, but friends said he treasured the memory. He kept a set list from that show in his desk at home. One of the few pieces of memorabilia he personally held on to. Sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, he'd take it out and look at it, remembering what it felt like to just be a musician again, even if only for a couple of hours. His son Richie later said his father talked about that night more than almost any other performance in his career. Not the big television specials, not the sold-out Vegas shows, but a Saturday night in a small Memphis club where nobody was expecting him, and he got to sing for the pure joy of it. The Blue Moon Club closed in 1978, but there's still a marker on the building, indicating that it was once a significant venue in Memphis music history. The marker mentions several important performances that happened there, including that September night in 1965, when Dean Martin walked into a Johnny Cash concert and became part of music folklore. The story of that night has grown over the years with various embellishments and exaggerations. Some versions have them performing for hours. Others claim they were joined by other famous musicians who happened to be in town. But the core of the story remains true. Two giants of American music sharing a stage in an intimate setting, performing for the pure joy of it. It reminds us that before they were legends, before they were the king of cool and the man in black, they were musicians who loved what they did. And sometimes the most memorable moments happen not in front of massive crowds or television cameras, but in small rooms with a few hundred people who happen to be in the right place at the right time. The story of that night also reminds us of something else. Fame is isolating. The bigger you get, the harder it becomes to have authentic experiences, to connect with people and with art in an unmediated way. Dean Martin had everything anyone could want: success, money, adoration. But what he was looking for that night in Memphis was something simpler and more precious. He wanted to be just another person in the audience, just another music lover appreciating a great performer. The fact that he couldn't have that even hiding in shadows he was too recognizable, too much of an icon to ever truly disappear. That's the price of fame. But what happened instead? Getting pulled onto stage, sharing that spontaneous performance with Johnny Cash, that became something even better. It became a reminder that sometimes when you can't have what you want, what you get instead can be just as meaningful. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think, and if you want to hear what really happened the night Dean walked into Frank Sinatra's dressing room unannounced, tell me in the comments.